Before we start, I want to say something gently. If your relationship feels strained right now, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to normalize what chronic stress does to good, loving, committed people. Because if you and your partner are fighting more about your child than about anything else in your relationship, if parenting disagreements feel heavier than behavior itself, if you sometimes find yourself thinking, we used to be fun, what happened to us? Then stay with me. This is the part nobody prepares you for. And once you understand what's actually happening between you under this kind of pressure, you'll stop taking it so personally, and that alone can change everything. In this space, we protect dignity, yours and your child's, especially when behavior is hard. We believe structure is stabilizing. We believe calm is leadership. We believe fear distorts perception. This is where parenting becomes steadier, more intentional, more grounded. Let's begin. I'm Christine, and I want to say something clearly and honestly. This kind of parenting strain breaks a lot of marriages, not because people don't love each other, not because they're weak, but because chronic stress quietly rewires perception. And when perception shifts, partnership destabilizes in ways that are subtle at first and then suddenly overwhelming. When you're raising a trauma-exposed, explosive, dysregulated child, your home is not operating under normal stress. It isn't the kind of stress that comes and goes with seasons. It is sustained. It is predictable. It is relentless. There's no clean decompression. There's no guaranteed rest. There's no predictable stretch where you refill your reserves. And when two already overwhelmed adults try to manage one overwhelmed child, the pressure does not disappear. It simply moves. And most often, it settles between you. You start snapping about tone, about timing, about how something was said, about who stepped in and who didn't. And gradually, the child's behavior stops being the only stressor. The relationship becomes a second battlefield. There was a point when my husband and I seriously discussed separating. Not dramatically, not in a screaming match, not with slammed doors, calmly and logically. We thought maybe we could each live in peace half the time. 2 homes, less tension, more quiet. Maybe we would each recover faster if we weren't both living inside of constant chaos. And I want to say something that most couples are afraid to admit. It sounded relieving. Relief sounded attractive. Not because we stopped loving each other, not because we wanted out of the marriage, but because we were exhausted in a way that made quiet feel like oxygen. When we slowed down, really slowed down, and imagined what that would actually mean, something became painfully clear. We hadn't fallen out of love. We had lost ourselves inside of the stress. If you're watching this thinking, we're not that bad, we're not talking about divorce, stay with me, because this doesn't start with divorce. It starts with subtle erosion. It starts with correcting each other in front of the child. It starts with private resentment building and you don't fully name it. It starts with feeling like your partner doesn't get it. It starts with thinking, I'm the only one trying. And those small fractures widen quietly over time. Not because either of you are bad people, but because chronic stress turns difference into threat. And once that difference feels like a threat, your alliance as a couple begins to erode. We were being triangulated, and the painful part is we were letting it happen. One of us was labeled too firm, the other too soft. One was too structured, the other too emotional. And on the surface, it looked like a parenting disagreement. But underneath it wasn't disagreement, it was fear. Fear this would never get better. Fear the other person was unintentionally making it worse. Fear that we were failing. And here's what chronic stress does that nobody warns you about. It makes your partner look like the threat instead of the ally they are. When your nervous system is chronically activated, it scans for danger. If the child feels uncontrollable, the mind looks sideways, and sideways often lands on the person standing closest to you, your partner. Both adults feel the same stress, but they assign different meaning to it, and meaning shapes reaction. When one partner tightens structure in response to chaos, the other may experience that as emotional coldness or rigidity. When one person leans heavily into empathy and processing, the other may experience that as instability or lack of containment and accountability. Now both adults feel unsafe. And when adults feel unsafe, we instinctively reach for control. Sometimes that control is obvious, sometimes it's subtle. Correcting tone, undermining decisions, rescuing after the person leaves the room, withdrawing emotionally. Once that pattern starts, the child feels the split immediately, not consciously, but deeply. Children move toward the adult who lowers their anxiety the fastest. That is not manipulation, it's regulation seeking. But if one parent rescues while the other forces, if one explains while the other withdraws, the family system fractures. And kids don't need perfect agreement, they need predictability. Because as we've been talking about, predictability regulates them. And your misalignment with your partner destabilizes your child. Now I want to speak directly to the parent who feels like they're carrying this alone. If you feel like you're the only one reading, learning, going to therapy, adjusting, researching, growing, changing, and your partner seems slower, because as we've been talking about, predictability regulates them. And your misalignment with your partner destabilizes your child. Now, I want to speak directly to the parent who feels like they're carrying this alone. If you feel like you're the only one reading, learning, going to therapy, adjusting, researching, and growing, and your partner seems slow, quieter, or less engaged, stay with me, because that belief, more than almost anything else, is the seed of resentment. For a long time, I believed I was the one doing everything. I was reading constantly, immersed in therapy, attending conferences, teaching parenting classes, studying trauma. I was changing, and I quietly expected that growth to fix the tension between us. It didn't. Because the tension wasn't about knowledge, it was about competition. What changed wasn't another book or seminar. What changed was this. I prioritized connection with him before I prioritized parenting. I stopped correcting. I stopped proving I was right. What changed wasn't another book or framework. What changed was this. I prioritized connection with him before I prioritized parenting. I stopped correcting. I stopped proving I was right. I stopped trying to win. And without pressure, he leaned in. Not because I forced him, but because the competition stopped. If you hear nothing else in this video, hear this. When you stop competing, you give your partner room to come toward you. It does not require both people to move at the same speed. One regulated adult can shift a system. One adult refusing to escalate lowers the temperature of the entire house. Unity is regulating, even imperfect unity. When children feel that the adults are aligned, even loosely aligned, something inside of them relaxes. When they feel a split, they move toward it, not to manipulate, but to stabilize the family system, to stabilize themselves. Therapy can help, individual, couples, preferably both, but only if the focus stays on the bond and the relationship between the two of you. If every session becomes a detailed analysis of the child's behavior, nothing changes. The stress simply gets rehearsed. The work has to examine what stress is doing to perception, communication, and identity inside of the marriage, because you cannot create a regulated home if your partnership feels adversarial. You cannot co-regulate a child while dysregulating each other. Unity does not mean you agree on everything. It means you protect each other from the child. Sometimes unity sounds like, we're not solving this tonight, we're both exhausted. Sometimes it sounds like, I don't fully agree, but I'll back you. Sometimes it sounds like, we can discuss this privately later. That is strength. That is leadership. That is dignity inside partnership. Here's what often happens next. Couples stop fighting, they soften, they lean heavily into empathy. They tell themselves they're finally on the same page, and then they swing too far. Because empathy without structure creates a different kind of exhaustion. And that is what we're going to talk about next. Because once you stop competing, the next imbalance is subtle. And if you don't see it coming, it will quietly recreate the stress in a new form. Watch that next. Because alignment without structure is just another spiral. And if this channel feels steady to you, if it feels like someone's naming what's happening instead of blaming you, stay here. These videos build on each other, and this work is too important to do alone.